Hey everyone, I'm Matt, and welcome to my channel and a brand new series I'm starting on building powerful and adaptable automations with PowerShell. In this series, we're diving deeper than just step-by-step tutorials. We're exploring the thought processes and methodologies behind writing code that's not only effective for today's tasks, but also designed to be adaptable and reusable for your future projects. We'll discuss how to think strategically about your automation projects, ensuring that your scripts can handle various scenarios and adapt to changing requirements. Today, we're going to take a look at how we can get data from a Google form into PowerShell, but we won't stop there. It's easy to get data from one form one time. But what we're going to do is create something that we can use to make the automation repeatable, adaptable, and reusable for future projects. In other words, what I'm going to show you is the thought process that I use when making automations. This is a great example because one of the biggest questions I always see with PowerShell is how can I make a user interface? Well, with things like Google Forms or SharePoint, you don't have to. You just have to be able to get the data from them with your code. So we'll start by setting up a Google Developer project, which will allow you to read your data from the Google Drive and create a quick form, and then move on to fetching that data using PowerShell. Then we'll dig down into the code, breaking it down step by step to see how we can make it flexible enough for various different use cases. By the end of this video, you'll have a solid understanding of how to integrate Google Forms with PowerShell for seamless automations. To do this yourself, all you need is a Google account, business or personal, and the UMN Google module for connecting to the Google API, and the Secret Store and Secret Management module. A link to a GitHub repo with all of the code from this video is in the description. So without further ado, let's dive in, starting with the UMN Google module. So this module is made by the University of Minnesota for interacting with Google Docs API. If we go to the documentation for this module, we can see that what we need to do is go to the console.developer.google.com and create a project for our API. This is a one-time setup that you'll need to do in order to be able to connect to your Google Drive. This is a one-time setup that you'll need to do in order to be able to connect to your Google Drive. So first thing that we'll need to do is create a new project. I'll just call mine form development. There is no organization because this is literally just my Gmail account. You don't need anything special to be able to create these, just any Google account. And once the project is created, you'll need to enable the APIs that you want to interact with. In this case, we're going to go ahead and select Google Drive. And Google Sheets. Now that we have our APIs, we need to set up the authentication mechanism. What you need to do is create a service account that you can use to authenticate with PowerShell. So if we go down in here to credentials, we'll create a new service account. You can call it whatever you want. And then we're going to go ahead and add the role of an editor. And if you have an organization and you need multiple people to be able to manage the service account, you would add those permissions in here. But again, this is a personal account, so I can just go ahead and click done. So this is the actual name of the account. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that off right now. Now, the way Google does authentication is a little different than some other APIs where you have a static token. Instead, they use private keys, and you'll use that key to create the token in your code. So we're going to go into the service account and manage keys. And then we're going to add a key and create a new key type of JSON. And what this is going to do is it's actually going to download a JSON file to your local computer that contains all the connection information you'll need to be able to authenticate with their API. So now we have that set up, we can go ahead and create our form. So if we just go to docs.google.com/forms, we can create a form. All right, so go ahead and give our form a name and add in a couple questions in here. What is your name? What is your quest? and what is the airspeed velocity of an unladen swallow. So now that we have our form, we need a way for our API to be able to get that data back. So in order to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to link the form to a spreadsheet. In the spreadsheet will just be named the same as the form with responses on the end. It automatically generates with the timestamp, and your questions will become the columns in there. So you'll be able to see each time somebody answers the questions to this, it'll get added to this form. So next, we'll go ahead and submit some answers to our form just to ensure that everything is working. Okay, so now we see that the data has been populated onto our spreadsheet. So I'm just going to add some additional data in here just real quick so we have some more stuff to play with. Now before we jump into the code, there is one last thing that we need to do. What you're going to need to do is you're actually going to need to share this document with your service account, right? Because you're creating this under your account. The service account doesn't necessarily have access to it. So if you go ahead and share and then just add in the service account with editor role, you'll be all set and ready to go. So now that we have our form, we have our sheet attached to that form that is collecting our data, it's time to see how we can gather that data from inside of PowerShell. So obviously to start with, we need to go ahead and import the UMN Google module. And then we need to get our access token. So using the service account that we just created and the JSON credential object that was downloaded, we can use the get geoauth token service to get back our access token. Now there's a small bug in this commandlet right now where it actually will return a null value and your access token. So I just have a quick where object to get rid of that null value on the end. But if I go ahead and I run that, I can see that we have our access token, which we can then use to get the rest of our information from. So now we'll just go ahead and set a couple variables for the name of our file and the first sheet that is in there. And then we're going to go ahead and get the the spreadsheet ID based upon the file name. And this is how the other commandlets will know exactly which file to get. All right, so if we look at this, it's just going to be a alphanumeric ID, but that's the internal ID of that spreadsheet, which we will then use the get gsheet data commandlet to get the data from it, right? So our cell is going to be all data, right? You can put a range of cells in there, so like A1 through E4 or what have you. But for right now, which is all data, we want everything that's in there. So if we go ahead and we run this real quick, we will see that we got the results from our request. And then finally, we'll just throw in a for each down here to where we can go through and we can process each of these requests and make sure that everybody answered their questions appropriately, or this is where you would put in whatever logic and data that you needed to inside of your script. All right, so if we go ahead and we run this entire thing, we can see that Sir Lancelot was good to go, but Sir Robin and Sir Galahad got thrown off the cliff. So if we run this again, right, what it's going to do is it's going to process everything all over again. Where each time we run this script, it's going to start at the first entry and work its way down. Well, if this is an ongoing automation, something that you are going to get data into a lot of times, we want to be able to say, hey, we've already processed this one. Let's go ahead and skip it. So a good way to do that is by adding a column to the sheet to let us know that we've already processed it. So if we come back into our sheet here, we can add in a column. We'll just call it API processed, something that would naturally be a question on your form. So the set gsheets data requires a couple things for it to be able to work. First, it needs to have the access token, the sheet name, and the spreadsheet ID. along with what the values are that you want to add in there. So it is expecting a range of values, right? But since we're just entering one value, we just kind of create a blank array that goes along with it. And then it needs to know where in the spreadsheet to write it to. So right now we just want to write to E2, which would be our first entry in here. And if we run this, though, what's going to happen is it's actually going to run for each and every entry, right? It's going to write it to E2, and that's not going to help us with our second and our third entries. So we need to determine what our row is going to be. In order to do that, we can use the PowerShell array function index of to be able to determine what our row is. So every time that you run here, you have an entry that gets, which is one object inside of the sheet data array. If we take a look at the index of entry, it will come back and it will tell us what our index is on that particular entry. So right now we're looking at the first entry, which is going to come back as a 0, right? Then obviously, since we're starting at a 0, we're going to plus 2, one for, to get it to 1 for a spreadsheet, and then another one for the header. So now we can come down here and we can just add in the row. All right, so if I run this real quick, all right, so we can see, and watch on here. So our row is 2, and we're going to go ahead and write that. And then again, row 3, and now row 4. So see that all 3 entries had that written into there. So to prevent us from processing those again, right, we would just come in here and we would add in a little where object, where API process not equals true. If I run this again, it should skip through everything and nothing gets executed, right? Because we've already gone through and we've done all of those. But now it becomes the question of what happens if we add another question to our form, right? Is our last column here still going to be E? Well, I can tell you it won't be. What will happen is that'll actually get shifted over, and that'll become column F. So you would need to account for that change in column, right? In order to do that, we can build out some logic to be able to determine what our column letter is going to be, right? And that's what makes it a little more difficult, because we now need to know what our letter is going to be, and not necessarily what our ID is, what the number is going to be. All right, so we can get the column by looking here at the entry PS object. So PS object is added to every single PowerShell object, and it contains all the information that is part of that object. So the members, properties, methods, all of those type of things are in there. So if we take a look here, we see all of our properties. The way that the PS object works is it returns them in the order in which they were added into the object. Whereas if you use getMember, they will actually return them alphabetically, right? And then again, we use the same process that we did up here, but this time we're just going to get the index of API processed, right? Which is going to be 4. All right, but then how do we determine, okay, are we going to create a huge, rainbow list to, say that, 0 equals A, 2 equals B, and all that type of stuff? What we can actually do is use ASCII. So ASCII 65 through 90 is A through Z. All right, so now what we can do is we can calculate our column number and then add that 65 to it, and now we have our row. So if I add this down here, and I go ahead and remove those, let's So now when I run this again, but then there's one more thing to consider, right? What happens if we end up with 27 or 100 questions on the form, right? At that point, what's going to happen is, the form is going to go, once it hits Z, then it's going to go to AA, AB, AC, and then so on all the way down to ZZ, right? So what we need to do is actually take that into consideration as well, right? Because if we're going to build this for reusability and something that's going to, be used long term, we want to be able to account for things like that, right? So in order to do that, what we can do is we can actually calculate the multiple of 26 for the column number, right? So right now our column number is 5, right? So our multiple of 26 is going to be 0, right? But if we go ahead and we set our column number to 55 here, right, and we divide that by 26, we get 2.1 something, right? But it's a factor of 2, right? So if we do the floor, which is going to automatically always round down, that gives us our 2, right? And then what we can do is we're then going to add 64 to it. So before we added 65 because we were counting from an array which starts at 0. Now we're counting from 1. So in this instance, it's actually going to be 64, right, which is going to give us B. So the first factor, 1, would be A. The second factor would be B. Right, and then what we can do is we now need to calculate out what our actual column would be. Right, so we can take what that prefix is, multiply it by 26, which is our 52, subtract that from our column number, and then add our 65 back, which is going to give us BD. So 55 would be BD. The one downside to this being, if it's under 26, it's not, this logic's not going to work, right? Because it's going to then try to, get a different number. So if I come back here and I'd set my column number equal to 5 again, what's going to happen if I run this? So I'm going to get the @ symbol and an F, right? So obviously that's not an existing column in my spreadsheet. So we can create some logic. We can just do a quick if statement to determine whether or not we need to add this additional logic, or we just do the first logic, right? And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go ahead and build that into a function at the top of here, because this is something that we could use all across multiple different automations, right? We could use this for talking to Google Sheets. We could use it for talking to Excel, for really anything that uses this AB type column lettering, right? All we're going to do is pass a column number to it, and we're going to get back what our letters are supposed to be, right? So it's the same logic that we applied previously. It's just checking to see if it's greater than a multiple of 26, so it needs to add that additional 1 on top of there. If it does, then that's great. So now what we can do is we can come back in here and remove all of this logic out of here. We just get our column number and then calculate out our column letter from there using our function that we just created. So if we go ahead and run this again, see that we have our E2, E3, and E4, just as expected. Now, there's one other item that you might want to take into consideration with this as well, too, is what if this column hasn't been created, right? Somebody recreated the spreadsheet, or you created in a new form, and you forgot to add that back in, right? That's definitely something that could easily happen. Well, in that situation, what we can do is we can actually take a look at what our columns exist and then find the next item that is going to go in there, right? So in this situation, if I run this, right, we came back with the @ symbol, right? Because that's 64. That's why that keeps coming back, because it doesn't know what it's doing. It's going backwards. It's getting lost, right? So what we're actually running into here is that it doesn't know what our column is, because if we look at our entry here, there is no index of API process. So this is actually going to return a -1. All right, so what we can do is we can get the count of columns in that situation. All right, so again, same exact item here. We're doing the PS object properties name count, and we know that we have 4. All right, so if we want to go ahead and calculate out that, we can use our same column here, and we know that we're going to want to go ahead and add it at 3. All right, so just some quick logic in there. So what we can actually do is come back in here and work it out so that it will add that header in automatically for us as well. All right, so we just do a quick if the column number is equal to -1, which means the column does not exist in the spreadsheet. Go ahead and calculate out what the column letter would be, the next one available would be in the sheet, and then set that value in there, right? So that in this case, our row is always going to be 1, right? Because we're talking about setting the header here, right? And then, otherwise it's going to come down here and calculate the column letter like it always would, right? So if we go ahead, so we check our spreadsheet here, we have no API processed column, nothing's written in there. We run this. As we go through the first run, we see it's added that in there. All right, it hit our logic up here with our column number being -1. Right, and as we run it through each process in here, it recalculates that, adds it back. Now that API process is in there, if we run this again, it won't hit inside of here because our column number will come back with an actual number because it exists, right? If we get rid of our filters. Oh, sorry, I had a typo on that. That's why we always test, right? There we go. We got our E4, our E3, and now our E4. So that's a great way. So essentially what you can do is you can reuse the entire logic of this sheet for any Google form that you want. All you have to do is replace this chunk here with whatever it is that you want to do with that data, right? Whether that's take action to it, call a different object, write it somewhere, what have you. That's great, right? The next thing that we want to take a look at though is this here, right? So as I mentioned, this is the JSON file that gets downloaded from Google. It contains all of the information for connecting your service account to your Google services, right? So this is actually something that's rather secure, something that you wouldn't want to have just freely sitting around on your machine. Right, so what we can do is we can actually use the secrets management module to go ahead and create a entry specifically with that JSON information in it so that it's stored securely on your machine. So importing the secret store, secret management module, right, if this is your first time running this, you run this get secret store configuration, it'll prompt you for putting in credentials. Otherwise, if you've already run it before, it'll just come back and it'll tell you in there, right? So we're just going to go ahead and set this up real quick. We got our pass, so it's I've set this up before. That's why it didn't prompt me to re-enter the password. I'm entering the password I had previously created. All right, so now that we have the initial configuration, everything confirmed, and that it is set up, we'll go ahead and register a vault for this. So we'll just go ahead and create one, call it Google Forms. And then what we need to do is we need to get the content of that JSON file. All right, so we just use get content, And adding the -raw on the end here is what will add that in as a one solid string object. Otherwise, when you use the get content, every line of your file will be part of an array, right? In this case, we just want a string. So we come in here and we can set secret. We'll just give it this name of what our service count is so that we can easily find it. So I got to run the first line first to get the content, and then we're going to go ahead and set that secret. All right. Now what that allows us to do is come over here to our form, replace this JSON path here with the code for us to go ahead and get that secret value put in there. And this actually becomes JSON string. So we can get that as a string value back into our script and be able to run it without needing to have this secure JSON file on our machine. So actually I can go through and delete this file now, and I should still be able to run this without any problems. Still connected, still authenticated. We are still good to go. So we've created a Google form. We've seen how we can connect to it using a service account, and how we can process that data, some ways that we can make that reusable across multiple different automations, and how you can have that automatically adapt to whatever your needs may be. In future videos, we're going to come back and revisit this script and see how we can set it up on a recurring schedule. Then down the line, how we can even involve it into a microservice. Thank you for joining me. I hope you found this video insightful and that it helps you in your automation endeavors. Remember, the key to powerful automation lies in strategic thinking and designing scripts that can grow and evolve with your needs. By applying the principles that we discussed, you'll be well equipped to tackle any automation challenge that comes your way. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more in-depth tutorials and insights. And feel free to leave a comment if you have any questions or you have any suggestions for future topics. I love hearing from you. So until next time, keep scripting and happy automating.